At 7:30 a.m. on June 6, 1944, Private Vinton W huddled behind the armored blade of a bulldozer on Omaha Beach and watched German machine gun fire tear into the fifth wave. He was 24, had barely 2 months on a dozer, and had never been shot at in his life. In front of him, the German 352nd Infantry Division had turned Exit Easy 1 into a kill zone. 17 machine gun positions, 4 anti-tank guns, and mortars already dialed in by map coordinates. Around 4,000 Americans were pinned behind an 8-foot ridge of stones with no clear path off the sand. Dove had joined the Army in September 1943, processing through Fort Myer in Virginia. He was married, had no kids, and before the war, he'd done construction work. The Army trained him on a Caterpillar D8 in about 3 weeks, then welded plates onto the cab and told him his job on D-Day would be clearing obstacles and opening exits. His own officer put it bluntly: odds of coming back were under 20%. Among the engineers, nobody pretended it was anything but a near-suicide assignment. Company C of the 37th Engineer Combat Battalion climbed aboard Landing Craft Infantry 553 around 0400. Dove rode in a cramped, airless compartment with 47 other engineers, minemen, Bangalore carriers, soldiers with metal detectors strapped across their backs, while the craft slammed through 6-foot seas. Men retched into helmets. Then, at 0715, an 88mm round ripped into LCI 553's hull. 11 engineers died on the spot. Dove felt the shock hammer up through the deck as seawater poured through the breach and the craft rolled hard, about 15 degrees toward the port side. As the men surged toward the ramps, another shell shrieked overhead and detonated in the surf 50 yards ahead. At 0728, the ramp dropped. Dove drove the bulldozer straight off into water up to his neck. The engine, sealed and waterproofed, choked, sputtered, and then caught. Through smoke and salt spray, he could barely make out the dark shingle bank roughly 200 yards away. Tracer rounds drew flat, bright lines through the gray morning. Bodies drifted past the dozer blade. On Omaha, the 37th took punishment as badly as any engineer unit on the beach. By 0800, 24 were dead, including the battalion commander. Company A couldn't even reach Exit Easy 3 through the artillery. Company B was nailed down right at the waterline. Company C had already lost a third of its men before anyone reached dry sand. Dove hit the shingle bank at 0742. 50 yards to his left, his relief operator, Private William Shoemaker, crouched beside a wrecked Sherman. The Germans had figured it out fast. The bulldozers were the key, so the bulldozers became priority targets. 2 dozer operators were already dead, their machines burning where they'd stalled near the surf. And behind the shingle sat the real barrier, an anti-tank ditch. That ditch stretched across the entire Exit Easy 1 area, 9 feet deep and 12 feet wide. The actual exit road was blocked by concrete obstacles reinforced with railroad rails. Beyond them, pillboxes and machine gun positions overlapped their fire, so every approach was covered. Thousands of infantrymen from the 1st and 29th Divisions flattened themselves behind the stones, stuck in place. They had nowhere to go. Mortar crews had the shingle bank pre-sighted. About once a minute, another pattern landed. Men were hit in tight clusters, 3 and 4 at a time. The plan had been to smash these defenses before anyone touched the sand. That morning, 480 B-17 and B-24s dropped about 1,300 tons of bombs and missed the beach defenses completely, releasing late in cloud cover so the loads fell roughly 3 miles inland. Nothing important on the shoreline was broken. Naval gunfire was supposed to keep the strong points suppressed for 40 minutes. In reality, the bombardment was brief, around 15 minutes, and much of it fell short or long. The concrete positions stayed functional. The German crews simply climbed back up and went to work again, and the armor plan collapsed too. 32 duplex-drive Shermans were meant to swim in and blunt the gunfire before the infantry arrived. In the rough seas, 27 sank before reaching land. In Dove's sector, only 2 made it, and both were knocked out by anti-tank fire within 12 minutes. The infantry had come ashore, essentially without armored help. Dove could do the math. Exit Easy 1 was supposed to be Omaha's main release valve. Tanks moving inland, trucks with ammo and med supplies, artillery pieces, everything. But nothing could move until someone carved a ramp through the shingle, started filling the anti-tank ditch, and dealt with the roadblocks. And the only machine on that beach capable of doing it was a bulldozer. If you want to see how Dove forced a breakthrough after 2 other operators were killed trying, hit like on this video. It helps us bring more World War II stories to you. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now. Then, let's get back to the beach. German gunners poured fire onto the dozer blade. Sparks ran across the steel in constant streaks. Dove couldn't lift the blade without exposing himself, and he couldn't drop it too low without losing what little view he had. He kept it around chest height and pushed forward anyway, driving almost blind through the impacts. By 0800, he was back at the shingle. The blade slammed into the stones and the machine bucked. Dove opened the throttle. The tracks spun uselessly, then finally grabbed. The dozer lurched ahead, carving the first workable break in the stone wall in his area. The moment that gap appeared, every German weapon within 400 yards had a precise aim point. Mortars began walking toward the opening. Dove counted the blasts. 3, 4, 5. He could tell the observers were adjusting. He didn't have long before the next pattern would land right on top of him. He backed the dozer off about 10 feet, swung the blade slightly left, and drove in again. This time he cut into the shingle at roughly a 45-degree angle. More stones spilled down and the opening grew, about 12 feet wide, enough for a jeep. Still too tight for trucks or tanks. Shrapnel rang off the added armor. A mortar burst hit about 15 feet behind him. Dove stayed pinned to the task and kept the throttle down. Inside the cab, the temperature gauge climbed. The seawater sealing around the exhaust stacks was starting to fail. Salt water had eaten at connections. Overheating wasn't a maybe, it was coming. That's when Shoemaker sprinted out across open sand toward the dozer, zigzagging through impacts as machine gun fire chewed up the ground near his boots. He reached the machine and slapped the armor twice. Dove's signal that it was time to swap. Dove climbed out as Shoemaker climbed in. The switch took 8 seconds. German marksmen didn't fire at them in that instant, not because they were merciful, but because a dead bulldozer solved the Americans' problem. And the Germans didn't want the problem solved. Keep the dozer running, keep the Americans trapped. Dove ducked behind a concrete obstacle. His hands trembled. His ears rang from engine roar and continuous detonations. He glanced at his watch. 0817. He'd been on the dozer 49 minutes, but it felt like a full day. Shoemaker drove into the gap and widened it further, another 8 feet. Then backed up and came at it from a new angle. The method was simple and brutal. Cut from multiple directions, turn a vertical face into a ramp, make the climb gentle enough for vehicles. At 0832, an 88mm shell exploded in the water behind the dozer. The anti-tank crews were ranging in now. They'd been spending their attention on infantry and obstacles until the bulldozer revealed itself as the real threat. Behind them, soldiers from the 16th Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division tried to impose order. A captain with a bleeding shoulder pulled 15 men together. They had one Bangalore torpedo left. He pointed toward wire obstacles guarding the draw that led to exit Easy 1. 3 men lifted the Bangalore and ran low. Machine gun fire cut them down before they made 20 yards. The torpedo landed in the sand, about 15 feet short of the wire. The captain sank back against the shingle. 11 of his 15 were casualties, and the wire still stood. The tide kept coming. The waterline advanced about 6 inches every 10 minutes. More landing craft arrived with more men and gear, stacking everything onto a strip of beach that had no functioning exits. Bodies bobbed in the surf. Wrecked equipment blocked lanes. German artillery had the range. Every new wave paid for every yard.
Dove watched as Shoemaker continued to work. The opening through the shingle had grown to roughly 30 feet, wide enough for trucks, maybe even tanks if they hit it at the right approach. But the anti-tank ditch still stopped everything cold. That ditch was the real choke point. Shoemaker drove toward it. The blade nosed over the edge and dipped down. He pushed, then backed out, bringing up sand, stones, and debris. He reversed about 10 feet and dumped the load into the ditch. One pass might move around 3 cubic yards. The ditch would need hundreds, possibly thousands. That meant time. And every German gunner could see exactly what he was trying to do. At 0847, a burst of machine gun fire raked the bulldozer's right track. Rounds punched into the housing. The track broke apart. The dozer lurched and died, engine stalling as it twisted half in and half out of the ditch. Shoemaker hit the starter again and again. Crank, crank. Nothing. The machine sat immobile, blocking the gap they'd spent 20 minutes carving while mortar observers prepared fresh brackets. Now it came down to Dove's choice. He could stay behind cover and maybe survive a little longer until the rising tide forced everyone into the open, or he could run roughly 100 yards across naked sand under machine gun and mortar fire to reach a crippled bulldozer that might never restart. A bulldozer every gun within 400 yards was watching. Offshore, General Omar Bradley stood on the bridge of the cruiser USS Augusta, studying Omaha through binoculars. Smoke columns, fires, smashed landing craft, men trapped behind the shingle with nowhere to move. He turned to his operations officer and said, it looked like Omaha was failing. He was weighing whether to pull forces off the beach and redirect them elsewhere. Then he lifted the binoculars again and noticed something near exit Easy 1. A fresh gap in the shingle bank, a stalled bulldozer, and a man sprinting toward it through a curtain of fire. That man was Dove. He ran hunched, low, head down. Tracers snapped through the air just above him. A mortar burst blew to his left and fragments hissed past his helmet. He didn't stop. 50 yards, 60. His boots slid in wet sand. He stumbled and caught himself. He reached the bulldozer around 0853. Shoemaker was still in the cab, grinding the starter. The engine turned but wouldn't ignite. Dove climbed onto the track housing and found the problem. Salt water had flooded the air intake. He spun off the wing nuts, yanked the filter free, and water spilled out. The engine coughed, briefly caught, then died again. The seal had failed, and the fuel was fouled. A machine gun burst marched across the blade. One round punched through the cab roof only inches from Shoemaker's head. Shoemaker ducked, but kept cranking. Dove dropped down and inspected the track. 3 links had sheared clean. Under normal conditions, that repair took hours, multiple men, and proper tools. Here, they had none of it. Only a crowbar, 2 exhausted soldiers, and a bulldozer stuck in an anti-tank ditch under direct fire. Behind them, the situation worsened by the minute. The tide continued to climb. Landing craft carrying the 18th Infantry Regiment circled offshore, unable to push in. With exits blocked, men and equipment piled up between the stone bank and the water, becoming a target-rich strip. Around 900, Navy destroyers closed the coast. Ships like USS Carmack, USS Doyle, and USS McCook, edging into water so shallow their keels scraped bottom. They turned parallel to the beach and opened up with 5-inch guns at near point-blank range. Concrete cracked. Machine gun nests came apart. Dove used that brief cover. He grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox, jammed it under the broken section of track, and levered. The track shifted a few inches. He reset the bar and heaved again. Another few inches. It was crude, painful work, but he got it close enough. Shoemaker hit the starter again. The engine spun, coughed, and finally caught. Thick black smoke poured from the exhaust, and the governor began to misbehave. The engine speed hunted, surging, sagging, surging again, but it stayed alive. He eased power to the left track and the bulldozer swung right.
The damaged track shrieked and ground against the sand, clanking like it wanted to tear free, yet it held. He fed in both tracks. The machine heaved itself out of the ditch, inch by inch, until it finally lurched onto firmer ground. The blade came up. He had steering. He had motion.
By 0914, they were back to the only job that mattered: shoveling the anti-tank ditch shut, one load at a time. They worked in a brutal rhythm, blade full of sand and stone, blade full of shattered concrete, blade full of splintered timber and bits of smashed landing craft. The ditch was 9 feet deep. A single push might raise the fill line only 6 inches. They didn't need one heroic pass, they needed dozens upon dozens more. And while they measured progress by inches, German gunners started finding them again. Howitzers firing from inland began dropping shells in tight groups of 3, the impacts stepping closer as if someone was walking them forward on a string, first 100 yards back, then 80, then 60. Dove and Shoemaker turned themselves into a machine inside a machine. They worked in short, repeating shifts, one man driving, the other spotting and guiding, swapping places without letting the bulldozer go idle. Offshore, the destroyers kept pounding the strong points. Some of the machine gun fire thinned, a few nests went quiet, but the artillery never really stopped. At 0942, a 105mm shell slammed down roughly 30 feet away, and the pressure wave snapped the bulldozer's blade upward, as if a giant hand had flicked it. The dozer rocked back on its tracks. Shoemaker wrestled the levers, forcing the tracks to bite before the machine could tip. The blade crashed down again. The engine faltered, coughed, and kept running. Then they saw new trouble. A hydraulic line on the right side was bleeding fluid. The red streak spread along the track housing, and the blade began responding slowly, like it was moving through mud. That was when reinforcements finally reached them. Engineers from Company B of the 37th arrived, led by Lieutenant Robert Ross. Ross took one look at what Dove and Shoemaker were doing and understood the stakes instantly. If this exit opened, the landing had a pulse. If it stayed blocked, thousands of men and the next waves of equipment would remain trapped on a narrow strip of beach. He put his engineers to work in parallel, blasting lanes through wire, clearing mines, and knocking out concrete roadblocks with satchel charges. German snipers began picking at the engineers as they moved. 3 men went down. Ross kept driving them forward anyway. By 1000, the ditch was roughly half filled, maybe enough for a Sherman to crawl across if it hit the approach at the right angle. Maybe. But the bulldozer itself was fading fast. Dove climbed back into the cab and felt it immediately. The temperature was critical. Hydraulics were failing. The right track was starting to slip. The machine that had carried their hopes was dying under them. He dropped the blade to scoop another load. The hydraulic cylinder groaned. The blade lowered a few inches and stopped, as if it had hit a solid wall. He tried again. It shuddered, sank another foot, then locked in place. The pressure was gone. The right side cylinder had failed completely. That was it. The bulldozer couldn't keep working. They'd carved a gap through the shingle and filled half the ditch, but their own machine was finished. More engineers arrived behind them, and luck finally showed its face. Company C of the 149th Engineer Combat Battalion had come ashore in that area by mistake, and they brought 2 more bulldozers, both still running. Those machines took over the job Dove and Shoemaker had started. At 10:32, the first Sherman rolled through exit Easy 1 and headed inland. More tanks followed, then trucks, then jeeps, then ambulances. Exit Easy 1 became the main artery off Omaha. By noon, thousands of vehicles had passed through. Dove sat on the dead bulldozer and watched the stream pour inland. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Shoemaker sat beside him. For a long time, neither man said anything. They'd been under fire for 3 hours and 26 minutes. 2 other bulldozer operators were dead. Their battalion commander was dead. 24 men from their battalion were dead. Around 11:15, an aide from General Omar Bradley's staff found them. Bradley had been watching from offshore and wanted to know who the two men on the bulldozer were, the ones he'd seen swapping positions under fire. The aide wrote down their names: Private Vinton W. Dove and Private William J. Shoemaker, Company C, 37th Engineer Combat Battalion. Bradley intended to recommend both for the Medal of Honor.
But the beach never stayed still for long. Inland, German observers were already calling new fire missions onto the exit they'd opened. At 11:47, artillery finally zeroed in on Easy 1. Shells landed east of the gap, then west, then directly onto the road. One round detonated on an ammunition truck, killing the driver and 4 soldiers, and blocking the route until engineers muscled the wreckage aside. The Germans couldn't close the opening again, but they could make every vehicle that used it pay a price. Dove and Shoemaker left the disabled Dozer and rejoined what remained of their company. Of the 48 engineers who'd boarded LCI 553 at dawn, only 31 were still alive. 11 had died in the first hit on the landing craft. 6 more died on the sand. The survivors turned into work parties, clearing obstacles, marking safe lanes through mines, dragging wounded men toward aid stations. By midday, their battalion had opened all 3 exits in their sector: Easy 1, Easy 3, and a third gap between them, while other engineer units opened additional routes farther west. Omaha stopped being a trap. Vehicles could move inland. Reinforcements could finally arrive. The landing had succeeded, but the bill was savage. By the end of the day, 5th Corps reported roughly 2,300 casualties on Omaha. The 1st Infantry Division lost about 1,190 men. The 29th lost around 743, and engineer units lost roughly 441. Many of those losses piled up in the first 3 hours, before exits existed, before men could get off the exposed sand. Dove kept working through the afternoon. He helped pull gear from crippled landing craft. He marked mine lanes with white tape. He guided trucks through the gap at Easy 1. Around 1400, his hands finally stopped shaking, adrenaline draining away, exhaustion taking its place. Yet, he kept moving and kept doing the job. By 1630, General Bradley came ashore. He inspected Exit Easy 1 and spoke with Lieutenant Colonel John O'Neill, who had taken command after the original battalion commander was killed. O'Neill pointed out the disabled bulldozer and explained what 2 privates had done, cutting the first breach through the shingle and filling half the ditch under concentrated fire. Bradley walked over and studied the machine up close: the broken track, the blown hydraulics, the bullet-punched cab. He asked where the operators were. O'Neill found Dove and Shoemaker, and they came to attention. Bradley asked their names and where they were from. Dove said Virginia. Shoemaker said Pennsylvania. Bradley told them he'd watched their work through binoculars from offshore. He said he would never forget seeing that bulldozer moving back and forth along the beach as if it were a calm Saturday at home, like they were simply clearing a driveway, not carving an exit under machine gun fire. He pushed the Medal of Honor recommendation up the chain. It was approved at lower levels, Division, Corps, 1st Army, and reached Supreme Headquarters in early July. General Eisenhower reviewed it personally. The recommendation was reduced to the Distinguished Service Cross for both men, with no clear explanation attached. Some officers later argued Eisenhower was managing awards by quota. Others believed engineer actions were judged differently because they weren't direct combat in the traditional sense. Whatever the reason, the decision stood. Bradley was reportedly angry, convinced the Medal of Honor fit what he'd seen, but Eisenhower's ruling was final. In August, Dove and Shoemaker received the Distinguished Service Cross from Major General Clarence R. Hubner. Their citations emphasized extraordinary heroism under fire, initiative, and refusing to quit when the bulldozer broke down, crediting their effort with opening the main route off Omaha. After the ceremony, Dove went back to work. The 37th Engineers moved inland with the advance: bridges, roads, mines, airfields, the routine engineer tasks that usually didn't come with machine gun tracers and anti-tank ditches. Dove was wounded twice more before the war ended, once in France in September 1944,
and again in Germany in February 1945, neither serious enough to evacuate him. He survived, returned to Virginia, built a life, had a family, and lived into his 80s. He rarely talked about D-Day. His son said the answer never changed. He wasn't a hero. The heroes were still on the beach. He just did what he was ordered to do, and he was lucky. The citation told the story differently. It framed his actions as decisive, instrumental in opening Exit Easy 1, immeasurable in impact on the Omaha landing. The Distinguished Service Cross eventually hung in the Engineer Museum at Fort Leonard Wood beside Dove's uniform from June 6, 1944. Salt-stained fabric, worn seams, dulled metal, silent proof of what a young bulldozer operator endured when the invasion hinged on whether he could push through 8 feet of shingle and begin filling a 9-foot ditch while every German weapon in range tried to stop him. People later tried to explain why he succeeded when others died. Training, temperament, luck, without landing on a single answer. Engineers did make one calculation that became part of the legend. The strong point covering Exit Easy 1 fired an enormous volume of rounds during the landing, with perfect fields of fire and clear visibility. Yet 2 men working in the open survived for hours. The odds said they should have been killed quickly. They weren't. The battalion stayed on Omaha for days after D-Day, widening exits, clearing more obstacles, and building roads from the sand to the plateau. By June 9th, tens of thousands of vehicles had moved through the routes the engineers opened. By June 13th, much of 5th Corps supply traffic depended on those gaps, with Easy 1 carrying the heaviest flow: tanks, tank destroyers, artillery pieces, supply convoys, medical vehicles evacuating wounded, moving day and night under intermittent shelling. The engineers widened the breach through the shingle to around 80 feet. They reinforced the filled ditch with steel matting, graded the approach road, and laid pierced steel planking to keep vehicles from bogging down. The opening Dove and Shoemaker helped create grew into a major lifeline. German artillery observers never stopped trying to cut it. They fired from positions near Saint-Lô and elsewhere. 105mm howitzers, 155mm guns, even rail guns farther back, sometimes 3 salvos in 10 minutes, sometimes a quiet stretch of 2 hours. The engineers learned the rhythm: hear the distant thump, count out the seconds, dive for cover. After enough days, experienced men developed an instinct for it. Dove left Omaha on June 10th as the battalion moved inland, switching from one kind of danger to another. Roads were blocked with felled trees, craters, blown bridges, and mines. The engineers worked ahead of the infantry, opening routes and marking safe lanes. Inland combat was still lethal, but it was spread out across weeks and months instead of compressed into a few savage hours. On September 14th, near Nancy, a mortar barrage caught Dove's squad as they cleared a road junction. Shrapnel hit his left leg and right shoulder. Medics bandaged him. He refused evacuation and limped with his unit until the leg healed. The second time came on February 9, 1945, near Prüm, Germany, another mortar attack. Fragments struck his back. 3 small pieces lodged near his spine, too risky to remove, and he carried them for the rest of his life, enough to set off metal detectors years later. He earned a Purple Heart with oak leaf cluster for 2 separate wounds. He didn't brag about it. When asked about medals, he said the Distinguished Service Cross was enough. He didn't need recognition for getting hit. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, the 37th Engineers were near Plzeň in Czechoslovakia. From Omaha to the end of the war, they'd advanced more than 700 miles through France, Luxembourg, Belgium, Germany, and into Czechoslovakia, building bridges, clearing roads, removing mines, staying just ahead of the front so the army behind them could keep moving. After the fighting ended, Dove had enough points to qualify for going home. The army used a demobilization point system. Combat time, months overseas, decorations, and wounds all counted. On paper, he could have been discharged right away, but the paperwork lagged. He stayed in Europe until August, helping with occupation duties. On August 23rd, he finally shipped out, and the transport took about 2 weeks to reach New York. The ship tied up at Staten Island on September 6th, 15 months after D-Day. From there, he processed through Camp Kilmer in New Jersey, received his discharge, and caught a train back to Virginia. His wife met him at the station. They'd been married 2 years, but only had about 6 months together before he went overseas. During the war, she wrote him 212 letters. He wrote back 97 times. Now the war was finished, and there was no reason to count letters anymore. They settled in a small town outside Richmond. Dove went straight back to what he knew: construction, heavy equipment, bulldozers most of all. He was the same kind of worker he'd been before the Army: steady, careful, reliable. He stayed with one company for 38 years, retired in 1983, lived quietly, and raised 3 children. He didn't become a veterans circuit guy. No organizations, no reunions, no parades. According to his son, he kept the Distinguished Service Cross in a drawer instead of putting it on a wall. When people tried to steer conversations toward the war, he redirected, brushed it off as something long ago, and insisted other men had done more. In 1994, the 50th anniversary of D-Day, attention surged again. Veterans were being urged to tell their stories. Reporters wanted interviews. Historians asked for specifics. Dove turned them all down. He was 74 by then, and his view hadn't changed. The beach was full of heroes, and he wasn't one of them. He just ran a bulldozer. Over time, his family persuaded him to donate his uniform and medal to the Engineer Museum at Fort Leonard Wood. The donation ceremony happened in September 2003. Dove was 83 and frail, but he made the trip. The museum director described the items as among the most important D-Day artifacts they had. Dove didn't say much that day. His son spoke for him, explaining that his father never believed he was special and never chased recognition. He saw himself as a soldier who simply did his job under extreme circumstances. The museum director framed it differently. He argued that what Dove did on June 6th was the hinge between success and failure on Omaha. That without a breach through the shingle, the landing might have collapsed. That Bradley had been close to pulling forces off the beach, and that opening, that exit, changed the outcome. 3 months later, Dove died, December 19th, 2003, of heart failure. He was 83. He was buried outside Richmond with full military honors, flag-draped coffin, volleys, the whole ritual. The Distinguished Service Cross was displayed beside the casket, the same medal he'd kept tucked away for decades. Back at Fort Leonard Wood, his uniform remained on permanent display. Visitors see the jacket marked by salt stains, the helmet, the boots still carrying traces of Normandy sand, and the medal sealed behind glass. A placard summarizes the essentials. Omaha Beach, exit Easy 1, hours under fire. People pause, read, and often move on quickly, because it's hard to feel the cold logic of what happened from a museum label. But the logic really was simple. Thousands of men were pinned behind an 8-foot shingle bank with no exit, while the tide crept upward, shrinking usable beach space by inches every 10 minutes. German machine guns overlapped their fire, so there were few safe lanes. Mortars were already dialed in. In that eastern portion of Omaha, Easy 1 was the one exit that could be opened fast. Easy 3 was getting hammered. Other exits were blocked by walls or wouldn't open until late afternoon. In the early hours, everything depended on Easy 1, and Easy 1 depended on a bulldozer. 16 armored dozers were assigned to Omaha. Only 6 reached shore. Within the first hour, 5 were knocked out. That left Dove's machine as the last functioning dozer in that eastern sector. If it failed, the gap stayed shut. If the gap stayed shut, the beach stayed a trap, and the people offshore might decide evacuation was the only option. Historians argue about what saved D-Day. Paratroopers inland, destroyers closing the point-blank range, small infantry groups knocking out strong points. All of it mattered, but without exits, none of it could flow. Without routes off the sand, Omaha would have stayed a killing ground with no release valve. Dove never understood why anyone made him the centerpiece of the story. In the 1990s, his son asked what he'd been thinking about while operating a bulldozer under fire. Dove's answer was plain. Blade angle, track tension, hydraulic pressure, keeping the engine from dying. He wasn't thinking about bravery. He was thinking about the work. That response baffled his son. How does someone do that for hours while thousands of rounds are being fired at him? Dove said there was no benefit in thinking about the danger. Thinking about the task helped. Keep the blades set correctly. Keep the machine moving. Don't let the tracks slip. It was basic operator discipline. The Army trained him to run equipment. They didn't train him to feel fearless. And on June 6th, the job was to cut a ramp through 8 feet of stones and start filling a 9-foot ditch while every weapon in range tried to stop him. So he did it, because that was the assignment. The Medal of Honor recommendation emphasized his heroism, his initiative, and his refusal to quit when the bulldozer broke. All of that was accurate, but it still didn't capture what Dove thought was the core truth. He wasn't chasing a heroic moment. He was trying to complete a task, and the heroism was a byproduct. When the recommendation was reduced to the Distinguished Service Cross, people filled the silence with theories. Some said it was because engineer work wasn't viewed as direct combat. Others claimed it was award management. Others believed senior commanders simply didn't grasp what happened at Easy 1. Whatever the explanation, the downgrade stood. Bradley never forgot what he believed he'd witnessed. Over the years, the line about Saturday afternoon became the shorthand for Dove's difference, working as if it were routine, as if the war were background noise. That wasn't mysticism or myth-making. It was professional detachment, the ability to do skilled technical work under maximum stress without letting panic steal your hands. The Army eventually tried to institutionalize that lesson. Engineer training later emphasized operating equipment under fire, using stories like Dove's to teach focus, task discipline, and the idea that combat work still has to be treated like a job with standards, because the job doesn't get easier just because bullets are flying. Inside the engineer community, Dove's name became familiar. Outside it, he stayed obscure. No blockbuster films, no big celebrity treatment. He lived in Virginia, worked construction, raised his family, and kept his medal out of sight. Every June 6th, he refused to watch anniversary coverage. When his wife asked why, he said he didn't need a reminder. He remembered everything. He remembered engine noise, diesel and salt, and the sight of men dying in the surf. What he tried not to dwell on was the arithmetic of survival. 24 men from his battalion dead that day, including their commander. 11 from his landing craft, more on the beach. He lived. They didn't. No medal could balance that. Some nights he still wondered why the bullets missed him when they hit everyone else. Decades later, attempts were made to turn that question into math. A researcher looked at casualty rates, time under fire, equipment losses, and exposure by weapon type. The bulldozer data produced a strange pattern. 6 dozers reached the beach. 5 operators died within roughly 90 minutes, on average about 37 minutes after landing. The last operator, Dove, stayed alive through 3 hours and 26 minutes, with estimates suggesting an unusually high volume of fire aimed at his position. The numbers were so extreme that the researcher treated the result as an outlier, something that doesn't fit neat models. He checked the figures repeatedly. He compared exposure time, intensity of fire, and conditions. It still didn't make sense in a clean statistical way. Later accounts even claimed German reports recorded enormous ammunition expenditure from the strongpoint covering Easy 1, along with a clear line of sight to the bulldozer and deliberate efforts to walk tracer fire onto it. Yet both operators remained functional. When the researcher interviewed Dove, he asked about tactical behavior. Did he take cover? Did he pause? Did he remember specific near misses? Dove said he didn't recall hiding at all. He remembered controls, position swaps, repairing the track, and pushing the work forward. Fear, he implied, came later, after the task was finished. He recalled hearing rounds hammering the blade and striking the cab, but he couldn't point to a single moment where he felt, "This is where I die." He was either behind armor, moving, or locked on the job. The researcher ended with a conclusion that sounded almost uncomfortable. The survival didn't line up neatly with tactical explanations or simple chance. That kind of statement is what happens when someone tries to force a human event into a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet refuses to cooperate. Dove never read that study. He didn't hunt for meaning in it. He'd moved on. The beach was history, and his life was the present. Grandchildren, routines, church, groceries, family dinners. Yet the beach never released him completely. Every June 6th, the phone would ring. Reporters, historians, filmmakers asking him to retell it. He usually declined politely, saying he had nothing new to add and that other men were more important. Eventually, he stopped answering the phone on June 6th. One of his grandchildren once asked him about the war after learning about D-Day in school. She was 7. She asked if he had been there. He said yes. She asked what he did. He said he drove a bulldozer. She asked if it was scary. He admitted parts of it were. Then she asked the question everyone asked sooner or later. Was he a hero? Dove said no. Dove's answer was always the same. The real heroes didn't make it home. That line bothered his daughter. Later, she took him aside and told him he was teaching the grandkids the wrong kind of modesty. He'd earned the Distinguished Service Cross. General Bradley had singled him out as extraordinary. He should allow himself to feel proud. Dove told her pride wasn't the point. Truth was. 24 men from his battalion died on that beach. He didn't. In his mind, that wasn't heroism. It was luck. His daughter didn't argue after that. She'd heard the same reasoning her whole life. Her father wouldn't accept praise, wouldn't claim credit, wouldn't let himself be treated as special. She'd stopped trying to change him years earlier. Some arguments never moved an inch no matter how hard you pushed, but privately, she wondered if what looked like modesty was something heavier. Guilt. The kind that settles on survivors who walked away when their friends didn't. The kind that makes a person shrink their own actions and hand every compliment to the dead. The kind that never fully fades. Dove never talked about that possibility. He didn't talk about the men who were lost. He didn't share names. He didn't tell stories. If someone pressed him, he'd say the past was the past, the dead were gone, and conversation didn't bring anyone back. Better to focus on the living. Better to live in the present. Better to leave the beach in 1944 where it belonged. And yet, sometimes late at night, his wife would find him sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. When she asked what he was thinking about, he'd answer, "Nothing important." She knew that wasn't true. She knew where his mind went when the house was quiet. Back to the surf, back to the stone bank, back to the bulldozer. Back to the one question he never managed to settle for himself. Why did the bullets miss him when they hit so many others? There was no answer that ever felt solid. People offered explanations anyway. A chaplain called it providence. Officers called it tactical fortune. Other soldiers called it fate. Dove said he honestly didn't know. He worked under fire for hours. The enemy had good training and clear lines of sight. They fired thousands of rounds. And still, somehow, none of it ended him. No explanation fit neatly, except one, the simplest one. The one people hesitate to say aloud. Sometimes a man survives because the mission requires him to. Because thousands of men pinned on a beach need an opening. And the only person in the right place with the right skill is a 24-year-old private from Virginia who knows how to run a bulldozer. Official records treated it the way official records always do. The battalion history gave him a few paragraphs. He cut the first break through the shingle at Exit Easy 1. He worked under continuous fire. He received the Distinguished Service Cross. Clean, clinical, no drama, just the facts preserved on paper. But the officer who took over command after their original commander was killed, Lieutenant Colonel O'Neill, kept a private diary, and his words were sharper. He wrote that what Dove did was the single most important individual contribution on Omaha Beach, that without that breach in the eastern sector, the position would have broken, that evacuation would have been on the table, that the entire landing might have failed. O'Neill never published those pages. They stayed in his family for decades. Years later, they were donated to the National Archives. Historians found the entry, compared it to official timelines and casualty lists, and matched it against what we already know about the flow of the battle, the moment when Exit Easy 1 turned from a dead end into an artery. Today, the landscape doesn't resemble 1944 at all. The shingle bank is gone. The ditch is gone. Most of the fortifications are gone. Exit Easy 1 is just a paved road leading inland, used by tour buses, rental cars, families on holiday, people rolling over the exact ground where two men spent hours under fire making an escape route for an invasion. Most of them have no idea what they're driving across. Near that exit, a small memorial honors the 37th Engineer Combat Battalion and lists the 24 men who died on June 6th. Dove's name isn't there. He survived. The monument is for the dead. But after his death, someone added a smaller plaque that acknowledges the other side of the story, that this exit was opened under fire by Private Vinton W. Dove and Private William J. Shoemaker, and that their work helped save lives. Shoemaker died in 1998, a heart attack at 76. He stayed in the Army after the war, reached sergeant, served again in Korea, retired in the early 1960s, and spent the rest of his life in Pennsylvania. Like Dove, he rarely spoke about Omaha. The two men stayed connected in a quiet way. They exchanged Christmas cards for 50 years. No visits, no long phone calls, just brief notes, year after year. Like two people acknowledging a shared mourning neither of them wanted to relive out loud. At Fort Leonard Wood, the Engineer Museum expanded its D-Day exhibit for the 70th anniversary. Dove's uniform remained the centerpiece, but they added something else, a recovered fragment from a bulldozer blade, rusted, scarred, still marked with impact pitting, pulled from the beach during salvage work. At the reopening, the museum director said the blade represented more than metal. It represented the way wars are often decided, not by speeches, not by medals, but by soldiers doing difficult, technical work under conditions that should have made the work impossible. Dove would have hated that speech. He would have said it was too much. He would have called the blade just steel and the job just a job. He would have pushed everyone's attention back toward the 24 men who didn't come home. But Dove was gone by then. He couldn't deflect praise anymore, couldn't minimize what he'd done, couldn't redirect the story away from himself. So the museum told it straight, about a private from Virginia who kept a bulldozer moving under fire, while an enemy strongpoint poured an overwhelming volume of rounds into his position. And somehow, he lived long enough to open a route when everything depended on it. If this story hit you the way it hit us, help it travel. Tap like. It tells YouTube this story matters. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you want more forgotten chapters pulled back into the light. And leave a comment. Where are you watching from? The US, the UK, Canada, Australia, anywhere. If someone in your family served, say so. Even a single line helps keep these memories from slipping back into silence.